Hi, this is Kirk, the bariatric carnivore. Well, can you live forever if you just treat your LDL cholesterol and take a statin drug and lower your cholesterol level? Will that improve longevity, etc.? And that has kind of been dogma really since the 1960s. Eisenhower had a heart attack when he was president of the United States back in the 1950s. Began a nationwide panic. I mean, we're at the height of the Cold War. Things were getting kind of tense. And, the president just had a heart attack, almost died. People are very concerned about it. And along comes Ansel Keys. And Ansel's got the answer why we're having this rash of heart attacks, and it's cholesterol. And he had this graph that showed that countries that had lower cholesterol levels in their blood had fewer heart attacks than countries that had higher cholesterol levels. And it seemed to make total sense until you realize that he excluded countries like Germany, Switzerland, and France, which had very high cholesterol levels, but also had low levels of cardiac problems. So when I look at that type of data, I'm kind of sitting there going, yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense. There's got to be another factor or two involved. And, keep in mind that back in the 1960s, people like Eisenhower's smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day. Yet nobody was blaming the cigarettes. It wasn't until the 1960s when the Surgeon General's report came out linking cancer and smoking, not heart disease, that a lot of people quit. And we went from half of the adults in the United States smoking to less than 10% today. And you look at the fact that, hey, we took the cholesterol message rather seriously, and the amount of saturated fat in the diet has gone down precipitously. We've been increasing the amount of vegetable oils that we've been eating, and we've been doing everything else. And then in the 90s, or 80s and 90s, statin drugs went on the market and got affordable. And people started taking those to reduce the LDL cholesterol in their bloodstream. And it was such an impressive thing that we could eliminate dangerous LDL cholesterol in people that a lot of people were discouraging people from going into cardiology because, hey, look, they're going to be putting these statins in the water. Everything's going to be fine. We're no longer going to have heart attacks. Well, has that been the case? Well, since this century, the number of heart attacks has been going through the roof. We've been actually having fewer people die of heart disease, but mostly because we're better at treating it. Back in the 70s, when you had a heart attack, they threw you in the back of an ambulance, took you to the hospital, and that's where they began treatment. And if you survived the ambulance ride, you had some chance of survival in the hospital with not that great of equipment, but it's only gotten better. We've now got defibrillators everywhere. We have more and more people that know how to do CPR. They treat, the heart attack at the scene, and great stuff at heart hospitals. We're really good at helping people overcome heart attacks and surviving them, but we still have more heart attacks. The numbers going up despite the statins, despite the reduction in smoking, etc. To me, there's other factors at play. And the reason I bring this up is I was watching a video from this guy, Muhammad Allo. He's a cardiologist from Toledo. And he is just a cholesterol fiend. He really does not like cholesterol, wants to lower it for everybody, and keeps attacking people that talk about the dangers that come from poor metabolic health. And I originally found him because he did a video dealing with high blood pressure, which I have a real strong interest in. Well, that put me into his algorithm, and so I've been getting a lot of his videos, and then I see him do a video where he is going after Dr. Ben Bikman, who is a research scientist over at BYU and has written some really good books and is a leader on really trying to help reduce insulin, and talks a lot about metabolic health. And he was attacking him for saying, hey, quit ignoring cholesterol, and I've been looking at a lot of Dr. Allo's videos, and he is just an absolute monster when it comes to wanting to lower the amount of cholesterol in the body. Now, if I could wave a magic wand and remove your cholesterol and get rid of all of it, you'd be dead within a few minutes. Cholesterol is a vital part of your body. And one of the things I have learned in my own life is that you can game that number. If you just want to reduce the amount of cholesterol in your bloodstream, that's fairly easy to do. You can lower your LDL cholesterol by just eating nothing but tons of saturated fat for a few days, and then going low fat for 18 hours afterwards, and you will reduce the cholesterol level. And the reason for that is because your liver produces a lot of LDL cholesterol, but it will shut down if it gets lots of saturated fat. And so it'll shut down its cholesterol production, but it takes about 48 hours for it to ramp back up. So, the number is highly transient, depending on what you're eating, how much exercise you're doing, etc. And I'm sitting there going, why is this highly transient number so important for your overall health? It doesn't make much sense to me. Now, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an MD, I'm not a clinician, I'm not a research scientist, but I'm looking at this stuff from a lay perspective, somebody who's trying to be healthier, and somebody who's had a heart attack. And I'm trying to figure this type of stuff out from my perspective, and I'm just sitting there going, why does everybody keep harping about LDL? And when I look at my own health history, look, I was a chubby kid. I started smoking when I was 16. I finally gave that up 18 some odd years ago. But I always had a weight problem. I didn't pay that much attention to what I ate. When I look at my past blood work, I realized that I was highly inflamed. I was probably pre-type 2 diabetic, if not a type 2 diabetic, depending on how you look at those numbers. They never checked my fasting insulin level, which is unfortunate. I'd be very curious to know what the heck that was back in the day. Never really checked my A1C either, but they were checking my blood glucose, and that was always high. And the inflammatory numbers were really off the charts high. But there weren't any drugs for that. But what was interesting was my cholesterol level was never particularly high. So I had a lot of risk factors for high inflammation, poor metabolic health, full-scale metabolic syndrome. I was fat, high LDL, high HDL, very high triglycerides, and high fasting insulin, etc., big waist, high blood pressure. So I had all the markers for metabolic syndrome. I was in poor metabolic health, but my cholesterol was never high enough to get on a statin drug. So I should have been fine. And unfortunately, I bought into the cholesterol myth because that's what I've been raised with. That's what we've been talking about for years and years and years. Yet, I still had a heart attack. Jeez, why did that happen? I don't know. Could have been the fact that I was in poor metabolic health. I was on 10 prescription drugs. I took fen-phen, which was highly destructive for heart valves, etc. When I look at all those things and, bad exercise habits, etc., it's kind of amazing. I waited until I was 61, to finally have a heart attack. Thankfully, about 10 years ago, I started getting serious about my health because some other issues that had popped up, not dealing with cardiovascular issues, but actually dealing with my eyes. And that's what got me to lose weight. And I had bariatric surgery. And then I discovered low carb eating. Then, a little bit later on, I discovered about 5 years ago eating carnivore, and I've only been getting more and more interested in this overall idea of metabolic health. And I can't discount or say that LDL cholesterol has no effect on heart health. It might, but frankly, they've been trying to prove a causal link between having, this cholesterol in the blood and your heart disease. And there's a lot of people that have great metabolic health, but have high cholesterol. and yet they're not showing any signs of cardiovascular inflammation. And I keep thinking, I don't know this with certainty, I can't say this with scientific authority, but I look at it going, it seems to be a marker of inflammation. The more inflammation you've got, that's where you're running into problems with the cholesterol becoming an issue. But if you have low inflammation, the amount of cholesterol you've got doesn't seem to be much of a problem. And, I don't take a statin drug. I'm one of those guys. I did get prescribed one back when my blood pressure was really high, when I was coming off all those medications and I quit drinking about 8 years ago. My blood pressure was shooting through the roof, and the cardiologist that I was seeing that was treating me for that really wanted me to go on a statin, even though there weren't any indications that I needed to be on one. It was just out of a cautionary principle. And I took it mainly because I was more interested in the anti-inflammation aspect that I'd seen. I'd seen some research that showed that there were certain statins were anti-inflammatory. I thought that kind of made sense, so we thought we'd give that a shot. And it turns out I'm one of those guys that, a certain percentage of them have really bad side effects. I was getting horrible leg cramps and all this other stuff, and I was feeling very lethargic. But the point is this: if you chemically reduce the amount of cholesterol, LDL cholesterol in your blood, are you going to feel better? Are you going to be healthier? Are you going to live longer? And frankly, I'm not seeing any research to prove that. When I've worked and reduced the amount of LDL cholesterol in my bloodstream through either diet or taking statin drugs, I felt worse. I don't think that made me feel like $1 million. I don't think it positively affected my health. And when you chase that number, ask yourself that question. I'm chasing a number. Is it making me healthier? Is it making me feel better? Is it changing my life for the good? And that's an important question, because I believe your health span, your quality of life does make a difference. And there's a lot of people that are dutifully taking statin drugs, enduring sometimes pretty bad side effects, including muscle wasting, etc., that go along with them, or not receiving much benefit from it as far as their overall health and quality of life. So ask yourself that question. Is that happening? Is it making a difference? Is it worth it? I don't know. It's between you and your doctor, and you can make up your own mind, but I think there's enough question marks to help me realize maybe LDL cholesterol isn't the thing. Maybe there's other stuff that's much more important. And people like Dr. Allo, who uses all sorts of great rhetorical tricks to get you to pay attention to his stuff, like his appeal to authority. I'm a cardiologist and I see patients. I teach people. I've got this degree, etc. And then his other appeal to authority, look at all the different cardiology associations that all support the lipid heart hypothesis that, your LDL cholesterol is the be-all and end-all and most important thing. And then he uses ad hominem attacks on his people that disagree with him, where he says they're not this authority, they don't have this particular degree, and frankly, most of them are rather unfair and show that he really has not paid a lot of attention to the details of who he's attacking. It just happens to be that I happen to know quite a bit about Dr. Bickman, and I realized from listening to his video that this guy has no clue in the hell Bickman is, and the fact that he does stay in his lane. He's a very humble scientist who happens to have some darn good ideas, and can usually back them up with some darn good research. So I'm just not going to put up with medical bullies anymore. I don't care if somebody's got an MD and a cardiology degree, and they're selling books and health programs, etc. I'll listen to them. I'll be respectful, and say, maybe you've got something, maybe you don't. But when somebody tries to bully me into agreeing with them based on, some sort of expertise or some appeal to authority or attacking opponents through ad hominem attacks, that's where I draw the line. That's where I get really upset, because these people have influence with other human beings and they're not really bringing up the true evidence on it. They're using rhetorical tricks, and that ticks me off, because in this fight for our health, we are all alone. But we can be all alone in this together, and we can learn from each other. And frankly, your experience matters. Your own research matters. Your own opinion at the end of the day matters. You have got to make the best decisions for you. And frankly, being influenced by somebody that, look, they may be a highly intelligent person that works in a particular field, but we all have biases, and they all come into play. And frankly, there's a lot of money that has been spent pushing this cholesterol idea for a long time. And when you look at the totality of the evidence and to look at lifespan and number of heart attacks, etc., our lifespan's going down. The number of heart attacks is going up. There's something not right with how everything's working. But we do notice that there seems to be this link between this inflammation, the amount of, the number one risk factor when it comes to having a heart attack is, are you pre-type or type 2 diabetic or pre-type 2 diabetic? Metabolic syndrome matters too. And to discount it and only focus on cholesterol and try to chemically reduce that number, I think is dangerous. I'm not saying that you need to ignore it, but I am saying it's not the only factor by far. And metabolic health, I think, is much more important. And that's one of the reasons why I've gone low carb and why I keep pushing. I do a basically carnivore diet to reduce the amount of inflammation. And that's worked. It's been easy to maintain a healthier lifestyle, eating single ingredient foods that really make a difference and have changed, the quality of my life, as well as the basic markers of metabolic health. Those count. That works for me. Maybe it'll work for you too. This is Kirk, the Bariatric Carnivore. I try to put out a couple messages each week. If you like this message, please hit the like and subscribe. Join this channel of other like-minded folks who are trying to get healthier. I will talk to you again soon.